British climate experts have taken another look at the costs of adapting to the impacts of climate change and found the previous figures greatly underestimate the true cost. The team, led by Professor Martin Parry, warned that the real cost could be 2 to 3 times higher than previously thought, and could be even more when the full range of climate impact on human activities is considered. The conclusions were published in a report by the International Institute of Environment and Development.
We looked at this study, which was done more than a year ago now by the UNFCCC, which is the framework convention body through which negotiations proceed for agreement on climate change, and we concluded that their numbers are at least 2 to 3 times too low. They estimate in the region of $50 to $100 billion a year needed year on year from now until 2030. We concluded, as I say, that at least 2 to 3 times too low, and they may be many times more too low than that.
With just 100 days before talks start in Copenhagen, this will have big implications on the recommended cost of adaptation.
Agreement at Copenhagen, a lot of people are now saying, depends upon adequate money on the table, as they say. If the UNFCCC's target is to get 50 to 100 billion on the table, developing countries, and they're saying it now, and will be saying it more strongly, is not enough. And I don't think agreement will be achieved. So part of the message from this report is you need to think in terms of 200 to 300 billion a year for adaptation. Now that's not including the costs of mitigation. Then I think the cost of adaptation will be starting to be adequately covered, and there's a good chance that developing countries will buy into an agreement.
The real impact of climate change is already highly visible in many areas across the world, particularly in developing countries. Flooding and water supply, health and food security are all major issues that will only get worse without adequate spending on adaptation. And although the costs are high, the cost of doing nothing is far greater.
I doubt if there would be a strong enough agreement at Copenhagen. Number two, if there was a sort of provisional one, we would be walking into the future with bearing the costs of impacts of coastal erosion, coastal flooding, river flooding, increasing losses of people through disease and heat stress, stresses on food supply as well, and we have seen signs of that, which we think are likely to be due to climate change. A lot of impacts which we would be bearing the cost of, and we reckon it's much cheaper to adapt, in other words to avoid the impact. Do you see what I mean? Probably the cost of adapting is a quarter to a third, broadly speaking, of the cost of bearing the impact.
The report authors are now calling for detailed case studies into what adaptation costs in specific places and sectors, so a more accurate figure can be allocated to responding to climate change in the future.